It's my lunch.
He'd managed to get hold of a pen with a tiny camera inside it. Remember, this was the early 2000s and smartphones weren't really a thing yet, but his pen cam was capable of taking and storing up to 100 high-resolution images. With it poking out of his breast pocket, he would take trips around the Diamond Centre and down to the vault itself. Security were by now familiar with him, so his regular presence raised no suspicion. Photography was forbidden in the Diamond District, but he was conducting detailed surveillance, covertly snapping every inch of the vault and its surroundings. Using the wealth of pictures he obtained, an accomplice allegedly built a full-scale and exact replica of the vault inside a warehouse. According to Leo, stepping inside for the first time felt like he'd walked straight into a movie. Everything was identical. The door, the security systems, even the 189 locked boxes that stored the treasures. The team spent 18 months using the replica to practice every move of the heist. Cue the obligatory training montage. That's quite enough of that. But the heist would require some more preparation and more bold moves from Leo during his numerous visits down into the vault. In September of 2002, he was standing in the vault's antechamber, the claustrophobic room that led to its huge door. He hoped that security guards who were by now acquainted with his face were a little lax and weren't paying full attention to their monitors. In full view of a camera, he raised his arms above his head. But this wasn't any old stretch or yawn. He was deftly sticking a miniature camera to the ceiling. He positioned it so that an overhead light obscured it from the security camera's view, and so that it was almost invisible to the human eye when the light was on. His camera watched the door around the clock, spying the guards inputting the vault's code, and the video footage was broadcast to a nearby sensor. The genius hid this sensor inside what appeared to be an ordinary fire extinguisher, which Leo attached to a wall inside a storage room, close enough to the vault for it to receive the video feed. Amazingly, the fire extinguisher was fully functional, but inside was a waterproof chamber that housed the electronics. The video footage also showed guards inserting the foot-long key. Using this footage alone, the King of Keys managed to duplicate it. That shows the level of talent he had. He didn't even need the original to form a replica of this apparently irreproducible key. It was time for Leo to make one last routine visit to the vault. Once inside, in one swift, singular motion, he pulled a can of women's hairspray from his breast pocket and sprayed the motion sensor with its sticky vapour, a manoeuvre he'd practiced countless times before. The oil in the hairspray was transparent, but it provided a layer of insulation that would temporarily restrict its thermal sensing capabilities. He knew the sensor would only trigger if it detected both heat and motion. 1 degree of difference in the room created by an occupant's warm breath or body heat would trigger the alarm. The residue would last until the heist at least, but it was difficult to estimate how long it would give them once there. When testing, they estimated one man would have roughly 5 minutes inside the vault, before his body heat penetrated the oily film and triggered the alarm. But the atmospheric conditions of the vault itself would differ from the replica, so there was a good chance he wouldn't even have that long to disable the system. Shortly before midnight, Leo's rented Peugeot 307 pulled up on Pelicanstrat, a street on the eastern rim of the Diamond District. Speedy, the monster, the genius, and the King of Keys hopped out, dressed all in black, wearing rubber gloves and carrying large duffel bags. Leo remained in the car, listening carefully to his police scanner. The King of Keys picked the lock of a derelict office building and they slipped inside. They'd done their research and knew the building shared a rear garden with the Diamond Centre and was one of the few parts of the district that wasn't monitored with cameras at the time. The genius had left a ladder there one previous night, which he used to climb to a small balcony on the centre's second floor. The balcony was watched by a thermal sensor, but he knew this already, so from his bag he pulled out a huge, homemade polyester shield. The shield's low thermal conductivity prevented his heat signature from reaching the sensor, making him effectively invisible. Slowly he approached the sensor before placing the shield directly in front of it, rendering it useless. The others scrambled up the ladder and watched as the genius then began to effortlessly disable an alarm connected to one of the balcony's windows. And then, one by one, they scrambled through the open window. And as easily as that, the Fearless Four found themselves inside the World Diamond Center, where they made their way down a stairwell and into the pitch-black antechamber of the vault. They covered the security camera with a black plastic bag and flicked on the light, to expose the familiar vault door they'd tackled in the warehouse over the previous 18 months. And it was time for the genius to demonstrate another of his inventions, when he pulled a homemade aluminium block from his bag. Using double-sided gaffer tape, he stuck the device onto the side of the two plates that formed the magnetic field on the door's opening edge, and he carefully unscrewed their bolts. The magnets were now free, but his custom device held them together, allowing the magnetic field to remain constant whilst he pulled it away from the door and taped it to the wall of the antechamber. Next, it was the turn of the King of Keys to make use of his foot-long replica key, but he had a niggling hunch. In the videos he'd watched, in order to form the duplicate, the guard would usually visit a utility room right before he opened the vault. He searched the room and was astounded at what he found. All this high-tech security, all these sensors and systems, and there was the original key just hanging there inside an unlocked utility room right near the vault. Well, there wasn't any point in letting the vault's manufacturer know that their key was actually replicable, so naturally he grabbed the original. He slotted the huge key into the keyhole, and the genius wound the combination lock to the numbers they'd learnt from the hidden camera footage. He then nodded towards the monster, who flicked the antechamber light back off again. They'd have to open the door in total darkness so as not to trigger the light sensor inside the vault. The King of Keys turned the key inside the lock until he heard the dull click inside. It was unlocked. He grasped the prongs on the wheel at the centre of the heavy door and rotated it, and the 8 thick steel cylinder bolts retreated inside the door, and it swung open. Excited, Speedy ran back up the stairwell where he could get phone reception, and he called Leo, who was still waiting anxiously back at the car. "We're in." The police scanner was silent. No alarms had been triggered, and only the 5 men knew the vault had been breached. In total blackness, the King of Keys easily picked the lock of the steel grate that desperately formed the last barrier into the vault. He stepped away. It was the monster's time to shine. He used a tub of paint he'd found in the utility room to prop the grate open, and he stepped inside. It was his job to disable the remaining alarm systems. His body heat was already beginning to fill the vault, and the film of hairspray would only last so long before the sensor picked up on the temperature change. He'd have to act fast but keep his heart rate as low as possible. As he'd practiced many times in the replica, he took precisely 11 strides into the vault, and reached up to the panelled ceiling, pushing one of them out of the way. He felt around inside the opening and found the 2 wires that connected the security system to the alarms. If any of the sensors inside the vault were triggered, the alarm would sound, and it would all be over. Working in total darkness and just by the touch of his gloved hands, he used wire strippers to tear away the plastic coating on the cables. One wrong move, one cut too deep, and the wire would sever, breaking the circuit and triggering the alarm. As soon as the copper wires were exposed, the monster clipped a small device to them, creating a bridge that completed the circuit but bypassed all of the sensors inside the vault. Thanks to him, these sensors were now rendered blind. It was finally safe for the others to join him, but they took no chances. The men placed another black bag over the camera, plastered the light sensor with gaffer tape, and placed a pre-made styrofoam box over the heat and motion sensor. But even then they decided to work in total darkness. They were all familiar with the layout of the vault by now anyway. Each of the locked boxes was protected by a key and combination lock, but the men knew that the seismic sensor inside the vault door was still active, so using power tools to force them open wasn't an option. But they'd already accounted for this. The King of Keys pulled a small hand-cranked drill from his bag, and one by one, using the briefest flashes of torchlight to align it, he forced its tip into the lock of each box, and wound the drill until the latch snapped and the box popped open. They filled the duffel bags with jewels and cash, gold and watches, and leather pouches brimming with diamonds. By 5:30 AM they'd managed to open 123 of the 189 metal boxes and empty them of their spoils. But it wouldn't be long before the sun came up, and the Diamond District would be a buzz of people once again. Speedy ran back to the top of the stairwell and told Leo to get ready. They were on their way. It took almost a full hour for the men